Everything is evidence for God. If you clicked on this video, you might be an atheist, and you might be a little bit annoyed with the title of this video. Everything is evidence for God. Guess what, atheist? Everything is evidence for God. Now, if you're annoyed, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to back down. It's true. Everything is evidence for God, and I'm going to show you how. So let's start by talking about the idea of evidence and God, because, of course, this was provoked by atheists saying, I'm an atheist because I don't believe in things without evidence. So there's no evidence for God, nothing evidence. So, I don't believe in God. It's sort of like a meme atheists say all the time. There's no evidence for God. Now, when I've, asked these people saying this, because I meet lots of atheists who say this, whenever I've asked them, well, I have some evidence for God, and I give it to them, they say, well, that's not real evidence, or, well, I don't really believe that evidence, or et cetera, et cetera. Or, the best is when I argue, and they say, oh, an argument's not evidence. Well, I mean, all that means is that this idea, this meme, is not it's not really a logical construction. It's more of a rhetorical trick. It's more of like, something that sounds kind of smart and, like, oh, this is a bulletproof argument, when really, I mean, it's kind of based on a shifting definition of evidence, like anything that is evidence for God, oh, that's not really evidence. That's how they get around that. And that's not really, that's just a waste of time, honestly. I mean, if you don't believe in God, fine, but don't say things like, there's no evidence for God, and I'm going to define what evidence means, it means whatever I think it means, like, that's not how it works, it's kind of annoying, to be honest. So you should stop saying that. You should just, if you don't believe in God, just don't believe in God, but don't say, like there's no evidence, and then not define what your standards of evidence are. So getting that aside, there is evidence for God, because the honest truth is that anything can be evidence for something. I'm gonna be wide open on this. Evidence. There's evidence that there's a flat Earth. I mean, there's not really a flat Earth, but there's evidence the Earth looks flat. I mean, anything can be evidence. So there's evidence for God, but with God, not only is there evidence, but everything that exists is evidence for God. And actually, it's really bulletproof evidence for God. I'm not going to back down from this. And the reason everything is evidence for God is because of what the word God means. Okay? Now, I'm going to talk about the idea of God from a Christian perspective, because let's be honest, that's probably the perspective that you have too. If you're an atheist and you're watching this and you're talking about God and there's no evidence for God, it's likely that you are either an ex-Christian or you come from a society that was built on Christian principles. And the reason that's important is that your idea of God comes from Christianity. Therefore, I'm going to talk about what Christianity defines God as, because that's what you mean by God, whether you realize it or not. Now, a lot of times when I talk to atheists about God, they have a very kind of cute image of God. I'm sorry, but it's kind of like childlike, like my 5-year-old would think this. They think that God is this man in the sky, this magical man in the sky with a white beard who looks over you and is literally living in the sky and looking at you with like eyes, and he like magically waves his wand. It's kind of like what my 5-year-old would think of God, but that's not how Christians view God. Come on, guys. Christians don't think that God is a man, and they don't think that he lives in the sky. They don't think he has a beard, okay? No Christian believes that. No one, not just Christians, no one believes that. The only people who believe that are atheists, as far as I can tell. No, in that case, I'm an atheist too. I don't believe in a man who lives in the sky, and everyone is. But that's not what Christians think when they say the word God, all right? So here's how I'm going to define this. I'm going to look at the Bible, which is like the basis for Christianity. I mean, well, not the only basis, but and I'm going to look at some philosophers like Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas. Those are like the cream of the crop for philosophy. And so we'll see how they define God. And we're going to talk about how that shows that everything is really evidence for God. Okay? So how does the Bible define God? Or more precisely, how does God define himself in the Bible? Because he does, right? So in the book of Exodus, the story of Moses. I hope that you know the basics of it, so I don't need to explain it. But put it this way: Moses is this is something that you should know. Moses lived in a polytheistic world. What that means is that when they said God, they never meant the person who created the universe. That's not, that concept didn't, like, they didn't think anyone created the universe. They thought the universe was created from chaos, or from like the bones of a giant, or whatever myth they thought. And they also, and when they said the word God, they usually meant like some supernatural thing that would control stuff. Like the god of thunder, the god of So when they said God, they didn't mean what we mean by God. Because when you say the word God, you do not mean Zeus or someone like that. You mean like the God that those Christian idiots are talking about. That God, who sent his son, Jesus Christ. The Bible thumpers. That's what and you think that God doesn't exist. So let's talk about that vision of God. When Moses, in the story of Moses, he finds a burning bush, and a voice comes from the burning bush. And the voice claims to be the God of his forefathers and tells him to go back to Egypt and free his people from the Pharaoh. And Moses asked a very reasonable question. He says, "Who are you? What's your name?" Voice from the bush, like, "What should I call you? What's your name?" And the voice from the bush, the burning bush, says, "I am who I am. Go and tell the people, I am has sent you to them." And that's what Yahweh or Jehovah means. It just means I am. It's just the Hebrew word for I am. Okay? Now, when I was a kid and heard this story, it went right over my head. And I hope that you're willing to listen and examine this more deeply, because really it's an intriguing idea. Like, what? Why did he say I am? Now, is he making a joke? Is he not completing the sentence? I am what? In order to really understand what's going on here, you need to look at what definition means, what it means to define something. When you define something, you restrict it to something. I mean, if you define an apple, you say it's a green or red fruit. That means that you cannot, that you are saying it's not a purple fruit. It's not an eggplant. You are restricting something when you define it. That's just what definition means. Another word that is used for definition is essence. Like, the essence of something is what it means. Like, what's what an essence means. So, like, if you look in a dictionary, you see words and you see what the definition is. And it's shrinking down the definition, because there's many things in the world. They all exist, but they exist in certain ways. An apple exists as a green fruit or a red fruit, not as a purple fruit, unless it's rotten. Okay? So that is what a definition is. So Moses is asking this voice in the bush, how should I define you? How do I define you? And what does the voice say? It just says, I am who I am. You define me by saying, by me, I exist. I exist. That's it. That's how you define me. There's no other way to define me. I exist. That's it. Okay. Now let's jump to Aristotle. All right? So Aristotle wrote a book called Metaphysics, which simply means before physics. He wrote a book called Physics, where he examined things that exist, and then he decided to write a book about existence itself, because that also needs to be examined. And he noticed that there are many things that exist, but they exist in different ways. He called those things essence. The idea of something existing in a different way is essence. And furthermore, he saw that things potentially exist and they actually exist. Now, this sounds complicated, but it really isn't. And it's also very, very down to earth. Okay? What potential and actual existence means is simply this. An apple is potentially an apple tree. You can throw it into the ground, and the seeds in it will sprout and become an apple tree. It actually is an apple. It's potentially an apple tree. It has seeds. Those seeds could potentially become apple saplings, which could potentially become an apple tree. But it's not actually an apple tree. It just potentially is. So there's two kinds of existence. That apple exists as an apple, and it exists as an apple tree in some shadowy future, possibly. It potentially could be an apple tree. It couldn't be an eggplant tree, it couldn't be a pear tree, but it could be an apple tree. So that's why potentiality is important, because you can say something can potentially be something else. But it can't be anything else. It can potentially be something else. Now, That's all potential and actuality means. Another thing that Aristotle noted is that in order for something to transform from potential existence to actual existence, and that's, he called that movement, from moving from potential to actual, he called it motion. That's what the word motion originally meant. It has to be acted upon by something that already exists. To break it down to our apple example, the apple can't plant itself in the ground, and it can't water itself, and it can't give sunlight to itself. It's only an apple. It's just potentially an oak tree, an apple tree. So, therefore, an actual dirt has to exist for it to plant in, and then actual sunlight needs to shine on that dirt. And actual water needs to be applied to that seed in the apple. If those actual things do not act upon the apple seed, it can never become an apple tree. So potentiality can only move to actuality by something that's already actual. None of this is controversial, by the way. Don't even try to argue with me about this, because I know that you're going to be full of crap if you try to argue with me on this. This is just basic, down-to-earth stuff. It's not a philosophical conundrum or anything. It's just basic stuff. But what does that basic stuff mean? Well, what it means is that because things only become actual, they only really exist if something that already exists acts upon them, that means that in the end, there has to be something that is completely just actual. Because everything is a mixture, a sort of mixture of potential and actual. An apple is actually an apple. It's potentially an apple tree. I am actually a man. I am potentially an old man. If I don't get hit by a bus, I will actually be an old man. So, there is only actuality when a potential becomes actual. But there's a problem here, because if you go back in this chain of causality where actual things cause potential things to become actual, which cause other, there has to be an end to that chain. Because potential by itself can do nothing. It's powerless. It has no power at all. The only thing that has power, the only thing that can bring forth actuality is other actuality. Okay? Because, a potential oak tree, apple, can never become an apple tree by itself. It needs someone to plant it. So, therefore, the chain of causation has to stop somewhere. If it didn't stop somewhere, nothing would exist. Nothing would be actual. So it has to stop. That's logically the only thing that can happen, okay? You can make up things where, it doesn't ever exist, it keeps going back. That's just nonsense. The idea is this literally like a square circle. It doesn't make any sense. You have to have an actuality at the end of there. You have to. There's no getting around this. Now, this thing that is actual has to be completely actual. Because if it was even a little bit of potential in it, then the thing that caused the potential to become actual would be behind it in the chain. So the chain has to end with something that's completely actual. Okay? Just existence itself. Furthermore, every potentiality, every essence, everything that something could be has to be present in this actuality. Like it has to be there, because otherwise it could never exist. It could never exist. Therefore, this thing at the end of the chain, Aristotle said, has to be pure existence, pure act, just actuality. And furthermore, he posited that this thing has to have every power that could exist has to be in this thing. Because if a power could exist, a power to do something, if it's able to be done, it has to be in this first thing. Everything that can be known has to be known by this thing. If it can't be known, it wouldn't be in the thing. But if it can be known, it has to be known by this person, this thing or this person. So, pure existence. That's what Aristotle posited. That's what God is. Just pure existence. And he got there by looking at apples and apple trees. You don't need revelation. You don't need you don't need any outside information to come to this conclusion. Okay? That is what philosophy says God is. Pure existence. Okay? Now, when you go back to Moses. Moses asked this voice in the burning bush, "Who are you? How do you define myself?" And the voice says, "I am." That's it. I am. You can't define me, is what he's saying. He's saying you can't narrow me down. Everything that could be is contained in my actuality. This is what the Christian definition of God is. Okay? Now, if a Christian says, oh, I don't believe that's what God is, that just means that the Christian you're talking to does not understand his own religion well enough. But this is what Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas said. This is also supported by the Bible. This is what Christianity believes God to be. Pure existence, pure actuality. Now, everything that exists is evidence that existence exists. Existence is what God is. So, like I said, everything is evidence for God, because everything that exists is evidence that existence exists. When you say God doesn't exist, what I hear as a Christian is existence doesn't exist. So whatever idea you have about God is actually incorrect. And what it really means is that existence actually exists. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel.